The assassination attempt against the former Secretary of State should have succeeded. The hotel's security was minimal, the target was exposed, and the shooter had a clear line of sight. What the would-be assassin didn't know was that the quiet hotel security guard in the lobby wasn't just checking credentials. He was a former Secret Service agent whose presidential protection training had prepared him to recognize and neutralize threats that others would miss entirely. For 8 years, Thomas Chen had been the invisible man at the Grand Plaza Hotel. While guests checked in and out of the luxury downtown establishment, most barely noticed the security supervisor in his navy blue blazer, quietly observing from behind the marble reception desk. To the hotel staff, he was simply Mr. Chen, the professional, soft-spoken man who handled lost key cards, escorted unruly guests to their rooms, and made sure the overnight shifts ran smoothly. What they didn't know was that Thomas carried credentials that would have shocked them. Hidden in his apartment was a framed certificate from the United States Secret Service documenting 12 years of presidential protection duty. The same hands that now checked guest registrations had once stood 3 feet from the President of the United States, scanning crowds for threats that could change the course of history. Those 12 years had taken Thomas through the Presidential Protective Division, protecting 3 different presidents during their terms in office. He'd stood watch in the Oval Office, coordinated security for Air Force One, and positioned himself between the leader of the free world and potential assassins. The transition from Secret Service to hotel security hadn't been easy. After spending over a decade where every decision could affect national security, the challenges of hotel management seemed almost trivial. But Thomas had learned something during his government service that kept him grounded. Protection was protection, whether you were safeguarding the leader of the free world or ensuring that business travelers got a good night's sleep. The fundamentals never changed: threat assessment, situational awareness, emergency response protocols. The Grand Plaza Hotel attracted its share of high-profile guests, corporate executives, minor celebrities, and occasionally former government officials who preferred the discretion of a boutique hotel. Thomas treated every guest with the same professional attention, but his trained eyes never stopped evaluating potential threats. During his Secret Service years, Thomas had developed what his supervisors called environmental intuition, the ability to sense when something was wrong before conscious analysis could identify the specific problem. It was a skill that had served him well during presidential protection details. Tonight was different. Tonight, former Secretary of State Patricia Williams was staying in the penthouse suite, attending a private fundraiser for international refugees. The event organizers had requested minimal security. Mrs. Williams insisted that heavy protection would send the wrong message at a humanitarian gathering. Thomas had reviewed the guest list, checked the building's security protocols, and positioned himself strategically in the lobby, where he could monitor both entrances. During her tenure as Secretary of State, Mrs. Williams had been involved in controversial refugee policies that had made her a target for extremist groups. Thomas's Secret Service background gave him access to intelligence databases that most hotel security supervisors never saw, and he'd spent the afternoon reviewing threat assessments related to Mrs. Williams's public appearances. What concerned him wasn't what he could see. It was what felt wrong. In 12 years of Secret Service work, Thomas had learned that successful threats often came from people who didn't look dangerous, who blended into the environment so seamlessly that they became invisible until it was too late. The man in the business suit had checked in 3 days ago under the name Robert Martinez. Room 847, 8th floor, direct view of the penthouse terrace where tonight's reception would be held. On paper, everything looked legitimate: corporate credit card, business address, even a LinkedIn profile showing him as a consulting engineer from Dallas. But Thomas's instincts were screaming. It started with small details that most security personnel would have missed. Martinez never left his room during normal meal hours, but Thomas had seen him in the lobby at 3 a.m. and 5:30 a.m., always carrying a leather messenger bag, always taking the stairs instead of the elevator. His behavior pattern suggested surveillance rather than business meetings. During his Secret Service years, Thomas had been trained in advanced threat assessment protocols that went far beyond checking IDs. He knew how to read body language, identify anomalous behavior, and recognize when someone's story didn't match their actions. Martinez triggered every warning signal Thomas had learned to trust. The way he positioned himself in the lobby, always with clear sight lines to multiple exits, never with his back to open spaces. His interaction with hotel staff, polite but minimal, avoiding conversations that might reveal inconsistencies. Most telling was his room selection. Thomas had discovered that Martinez had specifically requested room 847, despite the hotel offering him a larger room on a lower floor for the same price. Thomas began what the Secret Service called discreet surveillance, observing Martinez without alerting him to the scrutiny. Using the hotel's security camera system, Thomas tracked Martinez's movements throughout the building. The pattern that emerged was deeply troubling. Martinez had conducted systematic reconnaissance of the entire hotel. Security footage showed him walking every corridor, timing elevator responses, and identifying service entrances. He'd spent considerable time on the fire escape stairwells, mapping routes between floors that bypassed the main elevator banks where security cameras were most concentrated. Most concerning was Martinez's interest in the building's roof access. Thomas had observed Martinez testing door handles on upper floors, probing for unlocked maintenance entrances. During his Secret Service career, Thomas had investigated similar behavior patterns in connection with assassination attempts. The evening of the reception, Thomas positioned himself at the security desk with clear sight lines to both the main entrance and the elevator bank. The fundraiser was small, maybe 40 guests, all pre-screened by Mrs. Williams' personal assistant. Thomas had reviewed every name on the list, cross-referenced them with publicly available information, and identified potential concerns. He'd also done something that went beyond his hotel duties. He'd run Martinez's information through databases that his Secret Service contacts still allowed him to access. What he found was deeply disturbing. Robert Martinez didn't exist. The Social Security number was fabricated, the business address was a mail forwarding service, and the credit card had been issued using stolen identity information. Thomas was now certain he was dealing with a professional threat actor. In Secret Service terminology, this elevated Martinez from a person of interest to an active threat requiring immediate neutralization. At 7:47 p.m., as guests began arriving for the 8 p.m. reception, Thomas noticed Martinez leaving his room. Instead of taking the elevator to the penthouse floor, he had used the fire stairs to reach the 9th floor, one floor above the event. Through the hotel's security system, Thomas tracked Martinez's movement to the maintenance access door that led to the roof. Every alarm bell in Thomas's head was ringing. In Secret Service terminology, Martinez had just entered what they called the attack position, elevated location, clear line of sight to the target, escape route planned. Thomas had seen this pattern during threat assessments for presidential events, and it never ended well. But Thomas faced a dilemma that his Secret Service training hadn't fully prepared him for. He wasn't backed by federal authority, he didn't have immediate backup, and if he was wrong about Martinez, he'd be accused of harassment and paranoia. However, if he was right and did nothing, a former Secretary of State could die on his watch. The decision took him less than 3 seconds. Protection protocols override everything else. Thomas moved with the calculated efficiency that had made him one of the Secret Service's most reliable agents. First, he activated the hotel's emergency communication system, sending a coded alert to the front desk manager and the shift supervisor. Then he began implementing what the Secret Service called protective movement, getting to the threat before the threat could reach the target. Using his master key card, Thomas accessed the service elevator that would take him directly to the 9th floor. As the elevator rose, he mentally reviewed the building's layout, identifying choke points, escape routes, and tactical advantages. The roof access was through a maintenance door that required 2 key turns. If Martinez was up there, he was committed to his position. Thomas emerged from the elevator into the 9th floor service corridor. The maintenance door was propped open, a violation of hotel policy that confirmed his worst suspicions. Through the opening, he could hear footsteps on the roof level, deliberate and purposeful. Moving silently toward the access door, Thomas drew on 12 years of protective training. In the Secret Service, agents learned to approach unknown threats with what they called tactical patience, gathering intelligence before making contact, understanding the full scope of the situation before taking action. Thomas reached the roof access and carefully peered through the opening. What he saw confirmed every instinct that had been warning him for 3 days. Martinez was positioned behind the roof's HVAC equipment, approximately 60 feet from the penthouse terrace where the reception was in full swing. In his hands was a rifle with a scope, not the kind of equipment a consulting engineer from Dallas would typically carry to a business meeting. Through the penthouse's floor-to-ceiling windows, Thomas could see Mrs. Williams speaking with guests, completely unaware that someone was lining up a shot that would end her life. The former Secretary of State was less than 90 seconds away from becoming the target of an assassination that would have succeeded if Thomas hadn't trusted his training. But Thomas faced a tactical problem. Martinez was in a defensive position with a weapon, while Thomas was armed only with his experience and the element of surprise. In Secret Service training, agents learned that the best way to stop a threat was to eliminate the threat's tactical advantage. And Martinez's advantage was his elevated position and clear line of sight. Thomas had to move now. What happened next was the product of thousands of hours of Secret Service training and real-world experience protecting the president in hostile environments. Thomas didn't rush toward Martinez. Instead, he used what agents called tactical misdirection. Moving carefully along the roof's perimeter, Thomas positioned himself behind a ventilation unit that blocked Martinez's view of the access door. From this angle, he could observe the shooter's position while remaining invisible. Martinez was focused entirely on the penthouse terrace, adjusting his scope and waiting for the perfect moment to take his shot. Thomas activated his hotel radio on the emergency frequency. "This is Security Supervisor Chen," he whispered. "Code black on the roof level. Armed suspect targeting penthouse reception. Need immediate law enforcement response and guest evacuation protocol." The response was immediate. Within 30 seconds, Thomas could hear the front desk manager implementing the hotel's emergency procedures, a routine maintenance issue that required guests to move away from the penthouse terrace for just a few minutes. But Thomas knew that police response would take at least 8 to 10 minutes, and Martinez might not wait that long. Through his position, Thomas could see the shooter adjusting his aim as guests moved around the reception area. Mrs. Williams was still visible through the windows, and Martinez was preparing to take his shot. This was the moment Thomas had trained for during 12 years of Secret Service duty, the moment when everything came down to split-second decisions and perfect execution. In agent training, they called it protective action under pressure, and Thomas had practiced similar scenarios hundreds of times. Moving silently behind Martinez, Thomas used a technique called controlled approach, getting within striking distance without alerting the threat. The Secret Service had taught him that the key to neutralizing an armed suspect was eliminating their ability to use their weapon while maintaining officer safety. When Thomas was within 6 feet of Martinez, he made his move. "Secret Service, drop the weapon and place your hands behind your head." The command wasn't technically accurate. Thomas was no longer a federal agent, but the authority in his voice was real, and the tactical training was identical. Martinez spun around, surprised, but still holding the rifle. What followed was exactly what Thomas had been trained to handle. Using defensive tactics learned in federal law enforcement, Thomas disarmed Martinez before the shooter could bring his weapon to bear. The encounter lasted less than 20 seconds and ended with Martinez face down on the roof, weapon secured, and the threat completely neutralized. When the police arrived 8 minutes later, they found Thomas maintaining control of the suspect while protecting the evidence. The lead detective, Sergeant Maria Rodriguez, immediately recognized the professional way Thomas had handled the situation. "You former military?" Rodriguez asked, securing Martinez in handcuffs. "Secret Service," Thomas replied. 12 years on presidential detail. Rodriguez paused, looking at Thomas with new respect. "What's a Secret Service agent doing working hotel security?" "Same job," Thomas said quietly. "Different scale." The investigation that followed revealed the full extent of the threat. Martinez wasn't a consulting engineer from Dallas. He was a domestic terrorist with connections to extremist groups who opposed Mrs. Williams's international refugee advocacy. The rifle he'd brought to the hotel was capable of precision shots at distances far greater than the 60 feet between the roof and the penthouse terrace. FBI analysis of Martinez's hotel room revealed detailed surveillance notes, building schematics, and a timeline showing he'd been planning the assassination for over 6 months. His plan had been nearly perfect, except for one factor he couldn't have anticipated. He'd chosen a hotel where the security supervisor was a former Secret Service agent whose training had prepared him to recognize and neutralize exactly this type of threat. Mrs. Williams, when informed of how close she'd come to an assassination attempt, requested a private meeting with Thomas. The conversation lasted 20 minutes, and when it ended, Thomas had a job offer from a private security firm that specialized in protecting former government officials. But what surprised everyone was Thomas's response. "I appreciate the offer," he told Mrs. Williams, "but I like what I do here. Protection is protection, whether you're guarding the president or making sure hotel guests sleep safely. The skills are the same. The mission never changes." 6 months later, Thomas Chen was no longer just the hotel's security supervisor. The Grand Plaza had promoted him to Director of Security Operations, a position that included training other hotels in the chain on threat assessment and emergency response protocols. The assassination attempt had fundamentally changed how the hospitality industry viewed security. Thomas's successful intervention had proven that threats against high-profile guests were real and required specialized training to detect and neutralize. Thomas developed a comprehensive training program that brought Secret Service-level protection awareness to the hospitality industry. Hotel security guards across the region learned to recognize behavioral indicators, coordinate emergency responses, and develop the situational awareness that could mean the difference between preventing a tragedy and responding to one after it was too late. The program was so successful that it attracted attention from the Department of Homeland Security, which began incorporating Thomas's methods into their national hotel security guidelines. What had started as one man's career transition became a model for elevating security standards across the entire industry. Thomas's story spread throughout the veteran community as an example of how specialized training could be applied in civilian settings. Veterans who felt their skills were underutilized began to see new possibilities for meaningful service. But perhaps the most important change was in Thomas himself. During his federal service, he'd sometimes felt disconnected from the people he was protecting. At the Grand Plaza, Thomas discovered a different kind of protection work. Every guest who slept safely was a direct outcome of his professional attention. During quiet nights at the Grand Plaza, Thomas still walked the lobby with the same observational intensity he'd brought to protecting the president. But now he understood something that had taken him years to learn. Serving others didn't require a government badge or elite credentials. Sometimes the most important protection work happened in places where nobody expected to find a former Secret Service agent, places where threats were neutralized before they could develop, where people remained safe because someone with extraordinary training chose to use those skills in ordinary circumstances. Thomas Chen had spent 12 years protecting the most powerful person in America. Now he spent his time protecting anyone who needed a safe place to sleep. And in the end, he realized both missions were exactly the same, ensuring that good people could go about their lives without fear, knowing that someone with the training and commitment to protect them was watching, ready to act when action was needed. The skills were transferable. The mission was universal. The only thing that had changed was Thomas's understanding of who deserved protection. Everyone.